Coming out of a sunny Florentine morning. What I want to talk about today is what I've been calling it my pedagogical crisis. So I'll sort of take you through a bit of a story and give you a bit of an insight into how I've reconfigured my teaching. I've given it a fairly provocative title, so forget everything you know, and here comes the real story. Fairly grandiose, but it's more really just to stimulate some thinking. I'm using Adobe Express, so it's just going to be a continuous scroll. You'll see some of my photos along the way. I should really do a contest. They're of different parts of Italy. So one of the things that had struck me in recent years is strange errors that my students would make. Strange errors that don't exist in the language. So not like a wrong ending or a wrong word, but actually things that don't exist in the language. Yeah. So I've just given you two examples there. Questo libro, and it translates to English of this book. So it's just a strange, but quite generalized. And this other one, in vicino di, which is just, but that's not how you say it. But it's very common for students to say these things. And then this recurring issue of students at a reasonably advanced level, but just getting forms wrong all the time, and basic forms. So not complex forms, but basic forms. And so it had stimulated this, what's going on? Why, I've been teaching these things, we go through it, I do it this way, we look at it that way, then we come back to it, and then go back to it, and just all of these sort of strange things going on. To give you some context, I've been teaching Italian, actually it's over 30 years now. I started when I was 5. I'm a language enthusiast, I'm a linguist, so I've actually got really deep knowledge about the language. So it's not like what I'm doing in class isn't backed up by, solid grounding. So I'm not in there teaching rubbish, and that's why they're speaking rubbish. I've got quite a long history of doing this. And the interesting thing for me was I thought I'd learned Italian by being taught explicitly in class. But actually, the reason my Italian's the way it is because I had very early contact, a sort of immersive contact in my early childhood. But I never thought of it like that. I never linked the two things together. I thought it was just because I, studied at uni and then I just, learned Italian. And this was an interesting realization for me. And this was then coupled with this, what am I actually teaching them anything? Because I don't know if you've had this experience. You get your class, the good students at the start are the good students at the end. The weak students at the start are the weak students at the end. Now, if that's what's going on, something's wrong in the teaching, something's wrong. We're not doing anything, actually. What are we doing? We're just in there. I'm in there wearing an array of different outfits, and that's about it. So I sort of had all of these things going on in my head, and I went, how can I understand what's going on? I'm going to skip that bit and just go to this. I basically returned to looking at the research on applied linguistics. And, this might sound like a banal thing to do, but, sometimes we get in that situation where we're just doing what we do and just hoping that it'll, work out, or I'll try this, let's give that a go. And it's also got to do with how knowledge is constructed in the academy. Applied linguistics is in this silo, language teachers sit here, and sometimes there's no connection between these two ways of thinking. When you go back to the applied linguistics research, it's actually a little bit, pretty exciting, but a little bit scary. Essentially, for instance, in this book, Henshaw and Hawkins, are we all on the same page with respect to what acquisition is? Probably not. Do we actually know? How much do we actually know as languages educators about the acquisition process? And this is interesting. Classroom-based research on teaching and learning hasn't given us the answers. Yeah. That's why conferences like this can be good, because we can bring out what people are doing and see what's actually going and compare and contrast. And here I've put the link to Krashen's website. I'm a big fan of Krashen, actually. And I'd absolutely recommend that you go and have a look. Stephen Krashen, important American applied linguist, still very active, actually. His view is that we need to, he's got 6 hypotheses of language acquisition. One of them is because the comprehension hypothesis, comprehensible input. Now, this is the interesting thing. It doesn't matter what theory of language acquisition you ascribe to, they all say unanimously that it's comprehensible input. If what students are receiving is incomprehensible, there can't be acquisition. So whatever way you think about it, it's all about comprehensible input. Look at these other few things though. There's basically no evidence or very slim evidence that explicit teaching leads to implicit knowledge or acquisition. So we're up the front teaching the present perfect, thinking that they're learning it. They're not learning that. There's hardly any evidence that that's what's going on. What might be going on is some learning that's incidental because of the language that you're using, and they've comprehended some of the language you're using, but they're probably not learning what you think they're learning. This one, practicing speaking and writing, so practicing production, which is often what we do in classrooms, it doesn't improve speaking and writing. Krashen's work's really interesting because basically over decades, he's shown that what improves production is reception. Reading and listening improves production. So it seems counterintuitive. It's like, no, the more we get them to write, the better they'll write. No, actually, the more we get them to read, the better they'll write. And I was pretty skeptical about second language anxiety for a long time. I didn't really think it was a thing. I used to think to myself, no, just toughen up and just learn stuff. Just study and just learn it. And I think one of the moments for me was being in Spain a few years ago. You know, I'd been toying Spanish. Oh my Lord. Being put on the other side, trying to just say one simple sentence. I knew what to say. I had the whole thing that, did any words come out? No. Was I horrified? Yes. And so that really brought it home to me, this notion of the second language anxiety. Krashen's got a great paper called Down with Forced Speech. What we tend to do in language teaching is we get the students in class, give them 2 lessons and say, now talk. Very stressful, very stressful. His whole thing is lower the affective barrier, bring the emotion down. Here's an example of what comprehensible input is and what it isn't. This is a screenshot from their book, so it wasn't me that wrote what doesn't count as in book on the top of the second. It's meant to be input on the second. But this is quite interesting because it shows some good examples of things that often go on in class, and people think this is comprehensible input, but actually it's not. This book's very good. ensure importance. Let me just have a little look there. How's my timing going? Now I'm scrolling. Where can you find comprehensible input? And I've been saying this for many years, the teacher's the best resource. You can make something comprehensible in many ways in your teaching. So obviously, using visual cues, use your body, use synonyms, paraphrase, rephrase, use examples or common associations, cognates, and slow down and simplify. Some ways to just make something comprehensible. Obviously, there's lots of resources out there, and we know with the internet, there's an explosion of resources. I've stopped using textbooks completely because they're just really, they don't do what I need them to do. I've stopped, so my background, as I said to you at the start, I'm a pretty strong grammarian. For about 5 years, I'm not teaching any explicit grammar at all. Not at all. None. At any moment in class. And this is at a post-beginners level and at a sort of intermediate advanced level. I don't even illustrate the grammar if they ask me. I can, but I tend not to. I say, no, we're just going to do this. One thing that's really interesting is how relaxed the students are. It's astonishing, actually, how relaxed they are, and that makes them so much more receptive. They're so, they know they're not going to come into class and be bombarded with something that's going to be taxing and a bit horrifying. I'm using story listing. So basically what I do is I go into class and I tell a story. And these stories are they can be drawn from all sorts of sources. Typically I'm using folk tales, and in Italian that's quite easy to access because one important 20th century writer wrote 3 volumes of fiabe, little folk tales. And what I do is I tell the story. It's important to make it comprehensible. I'm using the approach is Benny-Con Mason, and she outlines sort of how to do it. So you use these comprehension assistance strategies. I do drawing. Maybe I write some words. I'm pretty physical, so I might act it out a bit. I do it in diverse ways so they get it. And then the students do a global comprehension activity. And this is an example of their cartoon version of a story that I just told them. And if you knew the story and looked at the cartoon, this was beginners level, actually, beginners level. If you looked at the story, you'd actually be surprised at how much detail they managed to get from the storytelling. I also support this with reading. This is actually a key aspect that I force them to read by assessing it. Now, how do I assess it? I assess it by a reading log. And the reading log's pretty straightforward. All they have to do, I give them a quota of, so they have to do something like read, I say 2 short stories or 2 chapters of a book a week, and then they have to write 3-sentence summary of what they've read. So there's some accountability in there. And then we use an online platform called EduBlogs. They have a blog that I can go and look at any point. So there's some accountability in there. It's a pass or fail mark. I don't mark their summaries because I'm not going to read everything they've read, but all I'm doing is saying, right, you do this, you get these marks. These full marks, it's about 10%. You do your reading log, here's 10%. they actually love it because, you know, there's no stress in the marks. They just have to do the work. And reflection is a key ingredient. I've put us in front of cheese because cheese is a key ingredient as well. So, so reflection, they reflect on the process of this story listening and this reading on how it's affecting their language learning. And those reflections are quite astonishing, actually, because I read some amazing things like, at the start of the semester, I couldn't even put a sentence together. Now I can write a whole paragraph. I've just finished reading a whole book. These are people that have done 3 semesters, maybe 4 semesters of Italian, and they've read a whole book. So it's showing me that this approach is actually very efficacious. Questions very clear about time, and so are other important researchers like Sparta, who obviously the more time we have, the better it is. And we know this from first language acquisition, because, you know, think of the first language. Children have basically, you know, years and years of listening to language before they produce language. Years and years of it. We don't have much time with our students. So the argument is use that time as efficiently as possible to get as much comprehensible input in as possible. Krashen basically says it's better to do 2 stories than do 1 story and then some grammar lesson. You'll get much better results with 2 stories than trying to explicitly teach students. What about grammar? My experience so far after these few years is we don't need explicit grammar. And what's interesting about the research, the second language acquisition research, is now showing more and more consistently that additional languages follow a similar path to first language. For many years, they didn't think this was the case. Now, if that is the case, think of how first languages are learned. You don't conjugate verbs with your toddler. You don't give your baby a vocab list and get it to repeat the words back. In fact, small children get fairly poor language. It's called the poverty of stimulus hypothesis. They get very poor. You know, we often you don't speak in full sentences to children. Yet, you know, after that amount of time, they've got a whole language architecture there. It's looking like second and additional languages function the same in our brain. So, yeah, there's really no need for us to be worrying about going there and, you know, teaching this rule and that rule and you know, this vocab and that vocab. When, from reading, from storytelling, they can have exposure to very broad vocabulary, a wide range of structures, a wide range of forms in context that allows the brain to do its work, which is build the architecture of the language. And the other thing is, as I sort of flagged before, not forcing output creates this really conducive atmosphere for learning. So, you know, with the comprehension sort of activities that I do after the story listening, I say to them, use Italian, use English, use whatever languages you've got, depending on what we're doing. Those comprehension activities can sort of range all over the place. So you saw I got to draw sort of the story. Sometimes I say, right, I've told you a story, create me a little play of the story. I've said in class sometimes, write a song and perform a song that summarizes this story. You'd be surprised. It sounds a bit cringy. It sounds like the students are going to, no, they love it, actually. They love it. And I love it as well. For me, it's so much more enriching than being in there, you know, with sad faces. I love this quote from Passion, and I'll just finish on this. I can share two mystical, amazing facts about language acquisition. First, language acquisition is effortless. It involves no energy, no work. All an acquirer has to do is understand messages. Second, language acquisition is involuntary. Given comprehensible input and a lack of effective barriers, so no strong emotional problem, language acquisition will take place. The acquirer has no choice. I think this is something for us to think about. Grazie mille. It's my email address.
Thank you very much.